The Count and the Wedding Guest, short story by O. Henry. One evening when Andy Donovan went to dinner at his Second Avenue boarding house, Mrs. Scott introduced him to a new boarder, a young lady, Miss Conway. Miss Conway was small and unobtrusive. She wore a plain, snuffy brown dress and bestowed her interest, which seemed languid, upon her plate. She lifted her diffident eyelids and shot one perspicuous, judicial glance and at Mr. Donovan, politely murmured his name, and returned to her mutton. Mr. Donovan bowed with the grace and beaming smile that were rapidly winning for him social, business, and political advancement, and erased the snuffy brown dress one from the table of his consideration. 2 weeks later, Andy was sitting on the front step enjoying his cigar. There was a soft rustle behind and above him, and Andy turned his head and had his head turned. Just coming out of the door was Miss Conway. She wore a night black dress of this thin black goods. Her hat was black, and from it droops and fluttered an ebon veil, filmy as a spider's web. She stood on the top of the step and drew on the black silk gloves. Not a speck of white or a spot of color about her dress anywhere. Her rich golden hair was drawn with scarcely a ripple into a shining and a smooth knot low on her neck. Her face was plain rather than pretty, but it was now illuminated and made almost beautiful by her large gray eyes that gazed above the houses across the street into the sky with an expression of most appealing sadness and melancholy. Gather the idea. Girls, all black, with preference for crepe sheen, that's it. All black, and that sad, faraway look, the hair shining under the black veil. You have to be blonde, of course, and try to look as if, although your young life had been blighted, just as it was about to give a hop, skip, and a jump over the threshold of life. A walk in the park might do you good, and be sure to happen out the door at the right moment. Oh, it will fetch them every time. But it is fierce. Now, how cynical I am, ain't I, to talk about morning costume this way. Mr. Donovan suddenly reinscribed Miss Conway upon the table of his consideration. He threw away the remaining inch and a quarter of his cigar that would have been a good for 8 minutes yet, and quickly shifted his center of gravity to his low-cut patent leathers. "It's a fine, clear evening, Miss Conway," he said. And if the Weather Bureau could have heard the confident emphasis of his tone, it would have been hoisted the square white signal and nailed it to the mast. To them that has the heart to enjoy it, it is, Mr. Donovan, said Miss Conway with a sigh. Mr. Donovan, in his heart, cursed fine weather, heartless weather. It should hail and bowl and snow to be constant with the mood of Miss Conway. I hope none of your relative, I hope you have not sustained a loss, ventured Mr. Donovan. A death has claimed, said Miss Conway, hesitating. Not a relative, but one who... I will not intrude my grief upon you, Mr. Donovan. Intrude, protested Mr. Donovan. Why say, Miss Conway? I would be delighted. That is, I would be sorry. I'm sure nobody could sympathize with you truer than I would. Miss Conway smiled a little smile. And oh, it was sadder than the expression in response. Laugh, and the world laughs with you. Weep, and they give you the laugh, she quoted. I have learned that, Mr. Donovan, I have no friends, no acquaintance in the city, but you have been kind to me. I appreciate it highly. He had passed her the paper twice at the table. It's tough to be alone in New York. That's a clinch, said Mr. Donovan. But say whatever this little town does. Loosen up and get friendly. It goes the limit. Say you take a little stroll in the park, Miss Conway. Don't you think it might chase away some of your molly grubs? And if you would allow me. Thanks, Mr. Donovan. I would be pleased to accept your escort if you think the company of one whose heart is filled with gloom could be anyways agreeable with you. Through the open gate of the iron-railed and old downtown park, where the elect once took the air, they strolled and found a quiet bench. There is this difference between the grief of youth and that of old age. Youth's burden is lightened by as much of it as another shares. Old age may give and give, but the sorrow remains the same. He was my fiancé, confided Miss Conway at the end of an hour. We were going to be married next spring. I did not want you to think that I am stringing you, Mr. Donovan, but he was a real count. He had an estate and a castle in Italy. Count Fernando Mazzini was his name. I never saw the beat of him for elegance. Papa objected, of course, and once we eloped, but Papa overtook us and took us back. I thought sure Papa and Fernando would fight a duel. Papa has a livery business in Pecos, you know. And finally Papa came around. all right and said we might be married next spring. Fernando showed him the proof of his title and wealth and then went to Italy to get the castle fixed up for us. Papa was very proud, and when Fernando wanted to give me several $1,000s for my trésor, he called him down something awful. He would not even let me take a ring or any present from him. And when Fernando sailed, I came to the city and get a position at a cashier in a candy store. 3 days ago, I got a letter from Italy and forwarded from Picase saying Fernando had been killed in gondola accident. That is why I am in mourning. My heart, Mr. Donovan, will remain forever in his grave, I guess. I am poor company, Mr. Donovan, but I cannot take any interest in no one. I should not care to keep you from Gatesy, and your friends can smile and entertain you. Perhaps you would prefer a walk back to the house. Now, girls, if you want to observe a young man hustle out after a pick and shovel, just tell him that your heart is in some other fellow's grave. Young men are grave robbers, by nature, that is. Ask any widow. Something must be done to restore that missing organ to weeping angels in cryptosheen. Dead men certainly get the worst of it from all sides. I'm awfully sorry, said Mr. Donovan gently. No, we won't walk back to the house just yet. And don't you say you haven't no friends in the city, Miss Conway. I am awfully sorry, and I want you to believe that I am your friend, and that I am awfully sorry. I have got his picture in my pocket, said Miss Conway, after wiping her eyes with her handkerchief. I never showed this to anybody, and I will to you, Mr. Donovan, because I believe you would be a true friend. Mr. Donovan gazed long and with much interest at the photograph in the locket that Miss Conway opened for him. The face of Count Mazzine was one to command interest. It was a smooth, intelligent, bright, almost a handsome face. A face of a strong, cheerful man who might well be a leader among his fellows. I have a larger one framed in my room, said Miss Conway. When we return, I will show it to you. They are all I have to remind me of Fernando, but he ever will be present in my heart, and that's a sure thing. A subtle task confronted Mr. Donovan, that of supplanting the unfortunate Count in the heart of Miss Conway, that his admiration for her determined him to do. But the magnitude of the undertaking did not seem to weigh upon his spirit. The sympathetic but cheerful friend was the role he essayed, and he played it so successfully that in the next half hour found them conver- conversing pensively across two plates of ice cream, though yet there was no diminution of the sadness in Miss Conway's large grey eyes. Before they parted in the hall that evening, she ran upstairs, brought down the framed photograph wrapped lovingly in a white silk scarf. Mr. Donovan surveyed it with inscrutable eyes. "He gave me this the night he left for Italy," said Miss Conway. "I had the one for the locket made from this. Fine looking young man, yeah," said Mr. Donovan heartily. "How would it suit you, Miss Conway, to give me pleasure of your company to Coney next Sunday afternoon?" A month later, they announced their engagement to Mrs. Scott and the other boarders. Miss Conway continued to wear black. A week after the announcement, the two sat on the same bench in the downtown park while fluttering leaves of the tree made dim kinetoscopic picture of them in the moonlight. But Donovan had worn a look of abstracted gloom all day. He was so silent tonight that Love's lip could not keep back any longer the question that Love's heart propounded. "What is the matter, Andy? You are so solemn and grouchy tonight." "Nothing, Maggie. I know better, can't I tell? You never acted this way before. What is it?" "It's nothing much, Maggie." "Yes, it is, and I want to know. I will bet that it's some other girl you're thinking about. All right, why don't you go get her if you want her? Take your arms away, if you please." "I will tell you then," said Andy wisely, "but I guess you won't understand exactly. You heard of Mike Sullivan, haven't you? Big Mike Sullivan, everybody calls him." "No, I have not," said Maggie. "And I don't want to. If he makes you act like this, who is he?" "He is the biggest man in New York," said Andy, almost reverently. "He can about do anything he wants with Tammany or any other old thing in the political line. He is a mile high and a board as East River. You say anything against Big Mike and you will have 1,000,000 men on your collarbone in 2 seconds. Why, he made a visit over to the old country a while back, and the kings took to their holes like a rabbit." "Well, Big Mike is a friend of mine. I ain't more than douche high in the district as far as the influence go, but Mike is a good friend to a little man, or a poor man as he is to a big one. I met him today on the Bowley, and what do you think he does? Comes up and shakes hand. 'Andy,' says he, 'I have been keeping cases on you. You have been putting in some good leaks over your side of the street, eh? I'm proud of you. What's What will take you to drink? He takes a cigar and takes a highball. I told him that I was going to get married in 2 weeks. Andy, says he, send me an invitation. I will keep in mind of it and I will come to the wedding. That's what Big Mike says to me, and he always does what he says. You don't understand, Maggie, but I would have one of my hands cut off to have Big Mike Sullivan at our wedding. It would be the proudest day of my life. When he goes to a man's wedding, there is a guy being married that is made for life. Now, that's why I am maybe looking a bit sore tonight. Why don't you invite him? Then, if he has so much to muster, says Maggie lightly. There is a reason why I can't, said Andy sadly. There is a reason why he must not be there. Don't ask me what it is, for I cannot tell you. Oh, I don't care, said Maggie. It's something about politics, of course, but there is no reason why you can't smile at me. Maggie, said Andy presently, do you think as much of me as you did for you did for Count Maggini? He waited for a long time, but Maggie did not reply, and then suddenly she leaned against his shoulder and began to cry and shake with sobs, holding his arm tightly, waiting to cry, waiting the crib to sheen with tears. There, soothed Andy, putting aside his own trouble. And what is it now? Andy, sobbed Maggie. I have lied to you, and you will never marry me and love me any more. But I feel that I got to tell. Andy, there never was so much as the little finger of the Count. I never had a beau in my life, but all the other girls had, and they talked about them, and that seemed to make the fellows like them more. And Andy, I look swell in black. You know, I do. So I went out to a photograph store and I bought that picture and had a little one made for my locket and made it up all the stories about the Count and that he being killed so I could wear black. Nobody can love a liar. And you will shake me, Andy. I will die for shame. Oh, there never was anybody I liked but you, that's all. But instead of being pushed away, she found Andy's arms wrapped around her, folding her closer. She looked up and saw his face cleared and smiling. Could you forgive me, Andy? Sure, said Andy. It's all right about that. Back to the cemetery of the Count. You have straightened everything out, Maggie. I was in hopes you would before the wedding day. Bully girl. Andy, said Maggie with somewhat of a smile. After she had been through a short of forgiveness, did you believe all that story about the Count? Well, not to any large extent, said Andy, reaching for his cigar case, because it's Big Mike Sullivan's picture. You've got that in your locket.